It is good to be back with you again. It's been a while since I have been here, and for those who don't know me, my name is Kevin O'Brien. I serve on the preaching team, and I'm sort of the utility reliever going between campuses as needed. I have been a longtime member of Village Bible Church. I live in North Aurora, and some of you may know my sister. There's a reason why I'm wearing this shirt today. My younger sister is our missionary to Uganda. She has been there for many years now, is married to a Ugandan, and this past spring in March, she and my brother-in-law Patrick had their second child, Mariah Ann. Now, Mariah was born with a genetic disorder named Edwards syndrome, or trisomy 18. 90 to 95% of kids born with this don't make it to their first birthday. In fact, most don't make it past their first month. Mariah made it 4.5 months. This past week, on July 31st, she finally succumbed to the issues that arise from having Edwards syndrome. And the next day, she was buried outside of Kampala alongside relatives of her father. It's been, and so she asked that I let people know that she has, even in all of the difficulty, this is her, Village is her home. It's where she grew up. Even in all the difficulty, she's seen God's grace at work in the circumstances, and she is very grateful for many of you and others who gave to her family during this time of grief so that the medical bills didn't overwhelm, and that is greatly appreciated. And it strikes me, how strange is it, a girl who grows up in Yorkville, who teaches at Plano High School, who ends up in Uganda working with street boys and married to a Ugandan. How unlikely. We sang that song. It was a new song to me this morning. Unlikely. I love the message of that song. I love the sound of that song. It sounds like Memphis to me, which makes me happy. And it's true. It's unlikely. And throughout this series of extraordinary women of the Bible, we've met some very unlikely people. Heroes, and some a little bit shady, and some in very difficult circumstances. And as we come to John chapter 4 this morning, this is the third week in a row I'm preaching this sermon. And I don't think that's ever happened to me before. It just so happens through circumstances that I ended up in 3 different campuses preaching this sermon. And you might think, well, does it get boring or old hat? And the answer is no, because the more I look at this, the more it hits me, the more it hits home. And in the last couple of weeks, I've been thinking a lot about the question of who gets to come before God. Who fits? Who's acceptable and not? And those questions, those big questions of who can come before God, seem to be sort of in the air right now. And I mean that not just here where we're at, but worldwide. Spoke about the Olympics during communion, and a couple of weeks ago, opening ceremony, there's a big controversy about a part of those opening ceremonies. And for the first time that I can remember, Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, and Protestants all agreed on something. Right? That there was an offensive thing that happened about the Lord's table. I've never seen that before. Right now, I've seen in the last week Twitter wars over who is the really faithful Christian. Who counts? I've seen unrest and riots going on, perhaps even right now, across the UK. In part about the question of who counts and who doesn't. Right? In on Friday, a fundamentalist group in Somalia attacked a beach town and killed a bunch of people. Why? Who gets to come before God or not? And those are just the headlines. That's not anything about our day-to-day lives, right? The hurts and the frustrations and the neighbors and the family and the people that we don't like so much too. Who gets to come before God? And all of that stuff kind of makes me sad, not because those questions and arguments and offenses aren't real. They're very real, right? But often we allow those things to obscure the more important things. And our internal fights are often much less important than we think they are. Who can stand before God? Who is welcomed? And the story that we're looking at today is exactly about that. The short answer is, none of us gets to stand before God, not on our own. But because of Jesus, any one of us can. And today we're not so much focusing on this specific woman at the well, this specific Samaritan woman, as we are seeing Jesus through her eyes. And that's what I want us to look at. And we just read just the opening part of this story, and we're going to get to the rest of it after a bit. But if you notice, like most stories in the Bible, the details are kind of spare, right? We get the basics of the story. And sometimes it's because we only got the basics, we sort of miss some of the deeper things going on because we're 2,000 years and half a world away in a different culture and a different language. So I want you to imagine the scene with me for a minute as if it were a movie in your head. It's hot. And the sun is beating down, scorching the rocks. It's the middle of the day. And a breeze kicks up dust devils just enough to get grit in the air, not enough to cool you down. And she is walking half a mile from Sychar. Not a long walk, but one that nobody wants to take in the middle of the noonday sun. What choice does she have, really? And the sweat begins to run, and she's almost there, but then there will be the trek back with a heavy water jar held. And a few minutes ago, a group of 12 men passed her going into town. Jews. She could tell they were Jews, which was weird because Jews didn't come here. As they passed by, she grabbed her water jar a little more tightly, not sure what's going on, kept on going. Just have to make it there, get my water, get back. And I imagine as she makes the last turn, she thinks, okay, here I am. But wait, there, sitting on the wall outside of the well, is another man, another Jew. And he had been in contemplation just a moment ago, but now he's seen her. And she wants to ignore him and just get on with it. But she can't. Give me a drink, he says. I don't know what you would do or how you would react if you were in her shoes, but 4 words, actually 3 in Greek or Aramaic. 3 little words that would change everything for her. A woman whose name we will never know this side of eternity. And yet, this event that we just read, this scene that I'm asking you to think about in your mind, is one of the most recognized events in the life of Jesus. The woman at the well. John chapter 4 is early on in Jesus' ministry. 1 chapter ago, he meets with Nicodemus, a religious leader, late at night because he's afraid. It's a conversation that, frankly, is not surprising to us if we think about it. A religious leader talking to another religious leader. This is what we do. And yet, that was under cover of darkness. This conversation is not so recognizable, not one that we would expect at all. And yet, it is one of the most important conversations that Jesus has. And we're going to find just how important in a moment. But before we do, can you please pray with me? Father, we thank you for your church, for the fact that we can come together as your body to praise you, to worship and pray, and to hear from your word, and to see you more clearly. And I pray this morning that we would do that through the eyes of this outcast woman. And I pray that you would, through that, help us to see who you are and who we are to be and how we are to live in light of it. And it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. This is a surprising conversation, and yet it is a divine appointment. And I have no doubt that this woman, as she was approaching the well, wondered why this man, this Jewish man, she could tell he was Jewish. I'm not exactly sure how, but she does know, it's clear, probably the way he dressed. She knew it was an odd moment, but I don't think she knew it was a divine appointment. She didn't know how significant. You see, Jesus had come north because we're told in chapter 3 and chapter 4, he had left Jerusalem and spent some time with John the Baptist in the Judean wilderness where John is baptizing people. But Jesus is getting more and more popular. His ministry is blossoming. And so he leaves and heads north into Galilee because he's not ready yet to deal with the Pharisees. He needs more time to teach his disciples. So he's heading north to Galilee. And as he goes, he heads through Samaria, and she knows he's Jewish but doesn't know who he is. After all, she is a Samaritan. And the Samaritans are a people apart. They claimed they were the true Jews. They were the ones that really had it together. They only accepted the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Anything past that, prophets, wisdom literature, no. And they were people who revered Moses, the prophet, above all. And they were looking for a Messiah who would be a prophet like Moses. They live in this hill country between Judea in the south and Galilee, in the north. And once upon a time, this area had been the center of it all. And Sychar, the small town she's from, is on the edge of what had been Shechem. And Shechem in the Old Testament is a really important place. You see, it lies in the valley between Mount Gerizim in the south and Mount Ebal right next door in the north. This is the place when Abraham first goes into Canaan, he builds his first altar. This is the place where Jacob not only has a well where this scene takes place, and this field that he had, but this is the first place Jacob builds, or one of the first places Jacob builds an altar. This is the place where after the Exodus, Joseph's bones are brought and buried. The place where Joshua tells the people, choose gods of the Amorites or the Lord your God. This is the place where the people had to recite the blessings and curses back and forth from one mountain, shouting it to the other. This is the place where the Samaritans had their temple on Mount Gerizim. And that's just scratching the surface of how important this place was. But 2 Kings chapter 17 tells a different story about the Samaritans than the Samaritans told about themselves. You see, after the kingdom of Israel divided, the northern kingdom was led, the capital was Samaria, 6 or 7 miles away from Shechem. And in 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire came in and wiped them out. And this is what the Assyrians did in order to keep people under their thumb. They moved the bulk of people out of their homeland and brought other people in This way, people were not able to keep their kind of homeland in their minds and in their hearts. They were more pacified. And 2 Kings 17 says that 5 different nations or groups of people from Babylon and from Syria come in, and they are put into the place of Samaria, what we know as Samaria. And as they came, they brought all their gods with them. And 2 Kings 17 records this very weird event. They're settled in and they're doing their thing, and they are attacked by a group of lions. And the lions are wreaking havoc, and the people realize, wait a minute, there's a problem here. And they tell the Assyrian overlords, hey, we don't understand the God of this place, and you've got to send us a priest back so we know and we can follow the rules. Now the problem is they didn't get rid of their gods. They just added God in to the mix. But a priest was brought out of exile to teach them the way. And over time, some of the Jews who were left intermarried with them. When the Babylonian exile happened to the southern kingdom, and then they were brought back after 70 years, as we saw in Daniel, you know who opposed the building of the walls in Jerusalem? The Samaritans did. And by the time of Jesus, tensions were it was better, but it was a low simmer under the surface. You see, 150 years before Jesus, there had been a series of back and forth, and finally the Jews destroyed the temple on Mount Gerizim. And from that point on, basically, the Jews didn't go anywhere near this place that had been so central to who they were as a people. They didn't go anywhere near. They avoided one another. They didn't go through Samaria, even though it could be the fastest way through. They would go out of their way to go to the Jordan River Valley on the east and go north and south that way. And in one moment, in one event, Jesus crosses boundaries of gender and ethnicity and religion and status and says, who can come to God? Well, the people I come to. You see, this was a divine appointment. She didn't know it was a divine appointment, not at first, but Jesus had come to Sychar for her. He needed to go through Samaria, not for geography's sake, but for her sake. He knew that she would be here right now. Give me a drink, he says to her. And I have no doubt that there was a pause that happens then, right? She's an outcast. There is no other reason for her to be getting water in the heat of the day instead of in the morning when all of the other women would. And she's not a Jew. And she knows that not only do Jews and Samaritans not mix, Jewish men don't talk to Samaritan women at all. They did not want to become unclean according to the law. And now, she thinks, he is telling me that if I knew who he was, I would be asking him for a drink? That he would give me living water? This man who has no bucket, no rope, there is no living water here. This is a well, living water. There is no living water in all of the valley. Living water is water that flows, that continues to move. This well is good enough for Jacob. How can he say such a thing? How can he think that he is greater? And so, give me that water now if you have it. I don't want to make this walk one more time. I don't want to have to parade my shame in front of the people I live with. And she may not have known yet that it was a divine appointment, but she's beginning to understand that this is a different sort of a guy. Rabbi, perhaps. Although that's even more reason to wonder why he would speak to her. Wait, what did he say? I think at this moment her heart skips a beat. And her stomach flutters and her knees almost buckle. Bring your husband. Why would he ask me that? I don't have one. You're right. You've had 5, and the one you have now is not your husband. And Jesus speaks to her of water in a place of water to bring her to exactly this point, to point to her true spiritual need. Because even though she is mistaking the physical and the spiritual, the reality is that those two things are never separate in our lives. God has created us as physical and spiritual beings. And the physical realities that my sister is going through right now with the loss of her child is also a spiritual reality. They are not separate. In all of our relationships, in all of our circumstances, in all of the things that we face, big or small, those are all spiritual things. From the mundane tasks like going to get water out of a well or get groceries on a Sunday afternoon, from sacrifices to coming to church and participating in communion, those are all spiritual events. And she has a divine appointment with Jesus because that's who he is. He has come to Sychar for her because she matters to him. She matters to God. And then from that point we see her response in verse 19. Sir, the woman replied, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus told her, believe me, woman, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain, as he points over his shoulder to Mount Gerizim, or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know because salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. And the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Jesus told her, I, the one speaking to you, am he. And I think at this point it dawns on her that this is a divine appointment. And like many of us, the problem is, and many of us even now, when the divine appointment comes, when we are face to face with Jesus, what do we do? When we are faced with the harsh realities of the choices we make, the circumstances we engage, we give, like her, a dishonest answer. What does she do? 6 relationships you've had, Jesus says. We don't know the circumstances. We aren't told. We want more. Right? Give me the details, please. Sometimes we just want the dirt because that's the way we feel. And sometimes we want to say, who's to blame? Right? But the thing is, especially in that culture, 6 different relationships, guess what? There's blame enough to go around. It's not a one-way street. That's not how things work in human life. There's blame enough to go around. And the picture of her in this passage is clear. She is an outcast among the outcasts. There is no other reason for her to be getting water at noon because no one did that unless you were an outcast. You see, she is shunned by her own people. And here in the middle of the day, she is confronted by a Jewish rabbi who seems to be a prophet, but he's probing in very painful places, and she doesn't want to deal with that. So what does she do? She gives an answer, a question to distract from the pain and the difficulty that she is facing, to distract from her true need. And on the surface, it doesn't seem like it is a dishonest answer. It seems like, oh, there's a religious debate. Where do you worship? Who gets to come before God? Do you do it here? Do you do it in Jerusalem? Do you do it in a church or somewhere else? But it is dishonest because even though the debate was real, the debate was live and in front of mind for Jews and Samaritans, it wasn't the point. It was a distraction. Because what she wanted to do was not have Jesus probe in the difficulties that she was facing in her life. She wanted to get him onto something else so that she could hide from her shame. And we all do the same thing, right? We take our offenses to the point of outrage. And the outrage becomes an insulator against the problems we have, the places where Jesus wants to work in our own lives, and we can project them on someone else so we don't have to deal with the things that we need to deal with. We're not so different. But Jesus doesn't take the bait. She doesn't get the rise out of him that she wants. She doesn't get the distraction because his response cuts through the dishonesty, cuts through the distraction, because this is her divine appointment. And Jesus had come for her to show her something new, something truly refreshing in a way that would cut through all of the things that she was dealing with. He didn't avoid the difficulties of her life. He brought them up to her. Her husband's in her current situation. He doesn't answer in the way that she expects, but he takes what she does put in front of him and uses it to get her to the place she needs to be, because this is what God does. Wait, does he really say that the worship of God is not going to be in temples? No one in the ancient world would have thought that to be possible. Nobody. Is he saying that some kind of profound change is coming? Is he offering me a way out, a way to connect with God? It's too much, she says, too much for me to understand. When the Messiah comes, he will explain everything. Maybe it's another distraction, one final attempt to get him to leave her alone, but I don't think so. I think at this point she knows for sure he is different. Not just another rabbi, a prophet offering something new, something more than she could have hoped for, something more than she could have understood. I think she knows that she is at a crossroads. I, the one who is speaking to you, am he. And there it is. He is the Messiah, the prophet, the one who will change the world. Jesus had come for her because she needed to be delivered. But he has also come to her to offer her something that is actually rather amazing when we stop and think about who she was as a woman and as a Samaritan. You see, in caring about her, in choosing her for this divine appointment, Jesus reveals something that has not been seen to this point. We take communion together, celebrating the new covenant. That's what he's revealing. He is showing that he is the one to usher in the promise of Jeremiah chapter 31, a promise that as a Samaritan she would not have known. You see, in Jeremiah 31, Jeremiah prophesies of the new covenant in verses 31 to 34. Look, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. This one will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors on the day I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, even though I am their master. Instead, this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel in those days. I will put my teaching within them and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. But it even goes deeper than that, because by talking to her, by coming for her, this Samaritan woman, this non-Jewish woman, Jesus harkens back to something both older and gives something new. Because way back in Genesis 12 and 22, God tells Abraham, the entire world will be blessed by your people. In Isaiah 42, it is confirmed that Israel will be a light to the Gentiles. But Jesus' appointment with this woman shows that this new covenant is not just for the Jews, that it is for everyone. And that means no matter who you are or where you are in this room, because chances are most of us are not Jewish, it includes all of us. You see, Jesus says salvation comes from the Jews, but because of him, because of the new covenant in him, everyone has the opportunity to come before God. She is included. Jesus, the prophet, the Messiah, tells her so. And so what does she do? You see, he's at this divine appointment, he's seen through her dishonest answer. And so in verse 27, we read this. Just then, his disciples arrived, and they were amazed that he was talking with a woman. Yet no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you talking with her?" Then the woman left her water jar, went into town, and told the people, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" They left the town and made their way to him. Skip over to verse 39. Now many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of what the woman said. When she testified, "He told me everything I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. Many more believed because of what he said. And they told the woman, "We no longer believe because of what you said, since we have heard for ourselves and know that this really is the Savior of the world." The disciples return with food just as he is telling her that he is the Messiah, and they are stunned. They are actually more stunned than she was because she actually interacted with them. They can't even get the words out of their mouths. And she drops everything and goes back into town to gather the people who have shunned her and put her in this situation in the first place. Why? Because this divine appointment has changed her. Think about what she does. She does not just repeat what he has said about living water in the physical need or the broad spiritual truth about worshiping in spirit and truth. Those were important, but that's not what she does. Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. That's not a list. That is her front and center with her shameful life in front of the very people who have shamed her with it. That is everything laid bare, and that's what she leads with. Because Jesus has claimed her shame, has said that I know who you are, I care enough about you that I am not backing away, I am not worried about being contaminated by you. I have come for you. Could this be the Messiah? Could it really be happening now? The one to deliver us. That is what she is willing to do. To bring forward the worst of her life in front of everyone because of who he is and what he has just done. And the personal testimony of this woman becomes a catalyst for belief. Not because she hides, but because she doesn't. It became the means Jesus uses to reach more. Some believed, and many more believed because they interact with Jesus. And we all, no matter when in our lives, we look at our lives, we look at God through the eyes of our own experience, don't we? I mean, how can we not? It's the only way we exist in the world. But we need to be careful that we don't separate, okay, this is my life from, this is the principle, right? The timely thing from the timeless thing, because Jesus doesn't do that. The truth that this woman needs, the physical reality and the spiritual reality, Jesus bridges that gap. Because it's not just her physical relationships that need reviving, it's her spiritual life. And her physical and relational and cultural needs are connected to that spiritual life. Because we're whole people in need of connection with God and the people around us. And He cares about every part of us. That's why He's there. And none of us, even the outcasts, are truly alone. That is what He shows us. And the Samaritan woman's dramatic action here reflects the dramatic action of Jesus for us. The Jesus who intentionally came to Sychar for her, who intentionally comes to become one of us as a human being because we need Him. Because His actions reveal who He is and that His creation matters to God. And I wonder what she thought after those 2 days as Jesus and the 12 head north and out of sight. Something new has come. My life can't be the same from now on. Guess what? I can go to the well in the morning with the rest of the women because He has taken my shame. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be easy, and He's told us that. But this is a new start, and I can come before God and my neighbors with my head held high because He came for me. And I don't know where you see yourself in this story this morning, whether you identify with the woman at the well or the townspeople, or maybe you feel a distance. But the one thing I want us all to realize and to remember is the point of this story is not to elevate this woman. It's not to put ourselves in the center of the story. It is to see Jesus through her eyes, to point to Him. You see, we all have this tendency to put ourselves in the center, and it's understandable. And it's what I want to be very careful, because I am not saying that she is not important. She is very important. I love the way C.S. Lewis puts it. He says, there are no ordinary people. You have never met a mere mortal. And I think that's so true. She matters. She matters because God made her in His likeness and His image. And sometimes it's easy for us to forget that. Oh, that person can't come before God. But Jesus allows us to come before God. We are all broken. We are all shamed. We are all guilty. But God loved us anyway. And Jesus had to go through Samaria for her. Jesus had to become one of us for us, because that's who He is. He brings us to the Father and facilitates our ability to worship Him in spirit and in truth. And so, what do we do with that as His followers today? Well, first, it is our job to say, come and see the man who told me everything I ever did. No longer shamed, no longer making ourselves out to be better or worse than we actually are, but recognizing that He came for us in our brokenness, and that our brokenness is the thing He uses to reach those around us. And that means telling the story and reaching out to the people who are the outcasts and the half-breeds, and the right kind of people too. It means that we don't get to say who's worthy or not. Jesus came for us all. Now, the reality is, when we come to Him, He's going to poke where it hurts. He's going to make a demand on us. Are we willing to give that up for Him? Jesus came for us all, maybe even especially the people we don't like. Remember, the good guys in this story, the disciples, are the ones who are incredulous that Jesus would do what He did. And we skipped over the part of the story in verses 31 to 38 because we were focusing on the Samaritan woman. But this is the interlude, the time in between when she goes off to get the people and they get back, right? And the disciples want to get Jesus to eat. After all, that's what they went into town for. But his response is interesting. Verse 32, I have food to eat that you don't know about. And the disciples, just like the Samaritan woman, are confused. I think he's talking about physical things. And he says in verse 34, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Don't you say there are still 4 more months, then comes from the harvest. Listen to what I am telling you. Open your eyes and look at the fields because they are ready for harvest. And that is Jesus' heart. Right there. That's why he went to Sychar. It's the thing that is at the core of who he is, his love for his creation. And our job, like the disciples, is to go into the field, which he says is ready. Because even in our brokenness, God uses our brokenness to bring people to himself, because our brokenness reveals our need for living water to wash us clean. We've had our divine appointments. We've given our dishonest answers, and we tend to keep on giving them and keep on giving them. But the question we have to ask ourselves this morning, the legacy of the Samaritan woman is this: are we willing to take the dramatic action in our own lives so that we can be the means of God's next divine appointment? That's her legacy, and that's where we need to step in today.